So the healing steps for working with exiles. So now we're at this point where you have received permission from the protectors, right? And now you have your client, or your client is in self leadership or is being self-led. So there's a critical mass of self energy available. So you stepped out of direct access. Your client now is in relation with the exile, where now they're speaking directly to their exile part. So the healing steps are mainly used after you're done the work with the protectors. So we don't do the healing steps prior to that. So you have to have a clear path, like I said, have enough self energy available to then go into the healing steps. There are 8 steps. The first one is unblending, which we discussed in our previous lecture. The second one is building trust, a trusting relationship between the self and a part. The third one is witnessing, retrieval, or a do-over. Fourth is unburdening. Fifth is invitation. Next one is integration, intentions, and appreciation. And we'll go into details here. So most all of you already know the unblending piece. That's what we did in our previous lecture, how to unblend. What's unblending for? It creates differentiation between the self and a part. Unblending is basically just that, creating space so you can then proceed further down into the exile. You do not want to proceed when there's a critical mass of self. If needed, you need to explain why we are asking the part to separate during the unblending process. So some parts will need you to actually will need to hear from you. Why is it that you want me to separate? What's the type of work that you want to do? So giving that piece of information is super important so the parts can just reduce their energy and give you space and give you access to the exile. You want to let the part know the intentions of the work. What is it that we're about to do? And let it know that we don't want it to be alone, that we just don't want to push the part away or remove it, because that's not the purpose. That's not what we're doing. We're not removing parts. So just reassuring those protectors that yes, this is what we're doing. You can stay around, you can interject whenever it doesn't feel safe to you. Trust between self and the part. So you want to create trust between client self and part by using proximity. You might want to ask questions around how close are you to this part? How much energy are you feeling from this part? Can this part reduce its energy from 90% to maybe 40%? So that's when you have the client present with the exile. Exiles carry a lot of energy because they're like little kids that just want to tell their stories. And they're so anxious, they're so ready to just tell their stories. They just want you because now there's somebody there who's paying attention to us, who's paying attention to this little person that's caring so much. So you will guide the client in asking these proximity questions. How far are you from the part right now? Where are you with the part? Oh, I'm with my little person in the living room, or I'm in with my little person in the bedroom where I had where the sexual abuse happened. Is that a safe space? You ask the part if it wants to come out of that space and maybe go into a different space. A very important piece when just to check if your client is being fully self-led, you can gauge by asking, can you see the part through your own eyes? How are you looking at this part right now? So that's kind of like a self-energy little assessment there, because we discussed self-led parts yesterday, right? And how those parts may carry the agenda of rescuing the exile. And you might do the whole blending process, the whole 6 F's process with a part that is carrying that agenda, that is telling you what you want to hear as the practitioner, that is bringing you to the exile. So that's a self-led part. So once you get to that point, you might want to ask the client, can you see the part through your own eyes? Or are you seeing this part from a third person's view? That's more of a part. That self-lead and show caring and compassion and open-heartedness to the exile. So when you're in that space, when your client is in that space with their exile, invite the client's self to share the caring, the love, the compassion, the validation that this exile needs from them. That's a really good point to also update the exile. This is how old I am. You tell your client to tell that to the exile. Again, you're not doing direct access here. We're in insight. So you're just guiding the client and telling them the questions that you want them to ask to the exile. So your client would ask to the exile, hey, you know how old I am. Most exiles don't really know the client's self present, how old they are. So that's a really good opportunity to provide an update. This is how old I am. This is how much I've accomplished. I have a family now. Look, these are my kids. So updating the exile before going any further is very, very important because that creates more of the self-to-part relationship. You also want to check on how the exile responds to all of this. Often exiles respond in a they don't know that all of this has happened. So they respond in a very surprised way. Wow, you've accomplished so much. You have a family and you have kids and wow, I didn't know that. So very often you'll hear that from exile parts because they've been again in a dungeon, they've been repressed, they've been taken away from the present. Two things here as you kind of continue to update. Like I said before, exiles carry a lot of energy. So you want to ask the exile in advance to not overwhelm the client, or have the client to ask the exile if we're in insight and being fully self-led to not overwhelm me. Can you please, I'm here for you, but can you please not overwhelm me? I'm here to pay attention to you, but can you lower your energy from 50% to 20%? Would that be possible? So I'll often say, yes, that's okay. I'll just step back a little bit because they just want you there. Take as long as necessary to build this trusting relationship. This piece here is crucial in working with exiles. If that trusting relationship is not strong, as you continue forward, the exile is not going to trust the client's self and it's just going to overwhelm the system. And then all the protectors will come in. So spend as much time in that space. Sometimes you have to negotiate with protectors and have a contract with them before you start doing all of this with the exiles. Sometimes you have to have a contract with the protectors by mostly managers because they're the ones who will shut everything down for the most part. So creating a contract before you even start updating the exile with the protectors around safety. Hey, if it doesn't feel too safe, if it's too overwhelming, you are more than welcome to shut everything down. And that's your contract with them. Yes, Laura, go ahead.
Thanks. I got a little stuck on the for proximity, how close or far the exile is from self. I feel like I can feel that in my own system, but was like, how can you say more about how to do that?
So proximity is very important because then that's gonna help you as a practitioner understand how close is this exile to the client's self. And if they're too close with too much energy, then that's gonna lead to the system overwhelming and all the protectors jumping in. So if that's how it feels to your client or to you, then you would then tell the exile, hey, could you please lower your energy so I can pay attention to you? I'm here for you, but your energy is very high right now, and I just need you to lower that energy a little bit. Most of the times, exiles say yes, because now you're paying attention to them. Another important aspect of asking proximity questions is just to gauge if the client is still being self-led. Sometimes the client's self-led parts would take over, like I mentioned before, and those will make you believe that yes, we're doing this work, but you already know that there's an agenda there. Is that more clear,
Yeah, totally. Yes, thank you.
Maggie?
I'm not sure quite how I want to form this, but I'm thinking of specifically working with teenagers who
Mhm.
might have pretty active and potentially destructive firefighter parts.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering how you in that case when to move into healing steps and sort of like I'm envisioning a firefighter feeling pretty threatened by that. And so would you go back and
Yes,
contract with firefighters or
you're absolutely right. Yeah. We do not go into healing steps until we have a clear path from the protectors. That's why sometimes the protectors might give you a clear path, but they might be concerned and fearful about meeting, having the client self meet with the exile. So that's why contracting with them is also important before proceeding into the healing steps. Contracting with, let's say, with that firefighter, what are your fears? What are your concerns? What would you like to do if it gets too overwhelming? Is there a manager present that can take over if it gets too overwhelming?
yeah. Well, and I'm imagining that with I'm thinking of a client in particular who often turns to self-harm, firefighter self-harm, and I could imagine that part unexpectedly coming up. So the importance of constantly checking back in. It's not like a linear process of
Mm,
contracting with a firefighter. All right, let's yeah.
absolutely. It's not a linear process. You'll find yourself continuously going back, especially if you're working with clients who systems are parts led, who have so many parts just popcorning, like we mentioned yesterday. So it's totally okay to go back. I would rather you go back and check in and just take the time, take the time, take the time with the protectors because self-like parts will lead you, and don't take the bait of meeting with the exiles without a clear path. Yeah. Any other questions about proximity and client self and exile part relationship? Another negotiation that you might have to do is with the exiles in what I explained before. Negotiate around their energy. They lower their energy. Can you lower your energy to 10%, to 5%, whatever that is? Can you move back a little bit so I can pay more attention to you? Yes. Those type of questions go back to proximity and go back to creating the space, the clear space. Also, explain to them why their job is important and why it's in the best interest to not overwhelm the system. Exiles sometimes do not know that they overwhelm the system. They just want to feel heard and validated, and that's it. So have the client explain to them why it's in their best interest to not overwhelm the system. Because if they overwhelm the system, then they go back to they have been the dungeon, right? Yes, Maggie. Yeah.
Just one more question, but I'm thinking area where I don't know if it's skepticism or just a wondering that is coming in a lot for me is I think of exiles and from what I've witnessed as very, very young.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm having trouble putting such logical language, posing these questions and negotiations to an exile that might be developmentally pre-language. And because I'm thinking about even my own exiles, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm 4 years old.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. In that, I was going to cover that later on in the lecture, but we discussed developmental stages yesterday, and it's parts have developmental stages, right? So it is important to consider, and as you meet the exile, to ask questions. And sometimes the exile might not give you answers because of where they're at in their developmental stage. So that's when you have to use your creativity with your client as they're being in self or being self-led. So how does the exile look to you right now? Can you see the exile from your own eyes? What does it look like? What does this little person look like to you? Oh my gosh, it's a baby. It's a 6-month-old baby. What do we do with that? Right? That's when reparenting comes into play, because the self can act as a parent, right? And it's not a role here, it's more of a self energy that of compassion and caring. Oh my gosh, let me carry this baby with me. And you might have to guide your client in doing that. Where is a baby? In a cradle in the living room or their baby room. All right, can you go to that room? How does it feel being in that room right now? Yeah, I feel a lot. There's a lot of energy here. A lot happened to this baby. Can you see the baby from through your own eyes? Yes, I can. Would it be okay to move forward and lean into the cradle and look at the baby? Proximity. You see? So all of these things, you have to guide the client into doing that so they can then share that self energy of caring and being there for their exiles. Right? Can you hold the baby? Can you take it out of the cradle? Can we bring the baby into a safe space? Can we create that space for the baby? Questions about this?
It also makes me think of in the Twombly book, having one protector for the time being, perhaps take care of the baby. Is that, or is
So I would be careful with that, because that's then assigning roles to the protectors again. So as long as you have self energy present, the self can take care of it. You don't need protectors to take care or rescue. They're already giving you permission and space. Toby. Yeah.
This reparenting and these kind of questions are making me think about the inner child work of that John Bradshaw. Are you familiar with that? 'Cause it sounds like there's like guided meditations in there, and they seem very similar to what we're talking about in some ways. But then they'll have you, I think he has like a wizard or something. They have you generate, it's almost like externalizing your self energy, but it's that reparenting part. And then you'll say things to the child like retrieval, but also like, it's okay, we made it, or like telling them what they needed to hear at the time, maybe, or telling them that they do survive and that they will be okay. What do you think about that kind of language or talking with them?
Yes, and I think we touched on that yesterday too, the inner child work. In IFS, there's some of that language. It's not super far from that type of work, but what's different is that the self is doing all the work here. And you're actually inviting the person to be in their higher self presence. So we're not inviting a wizard, we're not inviting another part to take care of that. We're inviting the person's higher self to be present and to do this work with the inner child. That's one of the differences here, like in IFS. Yes, Maisha, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a question. Can you hear me? I don't know if my computer's too far back. I'm working with a teenager. She's 16. And so we do a little bit of IFS, but then just kind of looking at this like last question, like see the exile through adult eyes. Obviously, she's still a child and she's dealing with being parentified by her parents. They
Yeah.
don't show up for her. So like, how do I, because she's still a kid, so I'm like, how will I work this with a teenager, for example?
You're working with the teenager's developmental stage, right? And you see this little kid through your own eyes. Doesn't have to be adult.
Okay.
So with our client's developmental stage. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great questions. All right. So now the retrieval, that's part of the witnessing piece here. So that's the third step. And here you tell the client to ask the exile part to show them anything it needs them to know about the experience that it had in the past. And you can do that through asking the client to ask the exile to show them a video, pictures, a scene, feelings, sensations of things that happened. So now we're allowing the exile to like just fully show me everything that happened and what was that like for you. Again, you will notice, especially here, if your client is not being self-led, protectors will take over because those pictures, videos, or whatever your client decides with the exile are part of the exile, are part of what happened, are part of their experience. And those are painful. But if your client is not being self-led, then the system will feel very overwhelmed by this. Okay? So just August.
I've never done this work, so I don't know if this happens, but I could imagine. I know in other modalities like EMDR or SE, people can have memories come that they didn't know were there. And this sounds like a place where that might happen. So does that happen? I guess the answer is yes. And then I guess it's hard to talk about a pretend client, but even if you're in self, that experience can be really overwhelming. So as the therapist,
Right.
I'm
Yes.
very
Which
excited.
we'll go more into details tomorrow when we touch on therapist parts and therapists being more self-led.
I don't mean for the therapist, I mean the client, if they didn't know this was there and then all of a sudden the part is telling them, I could imagine, even if they're in self, that being really overwhelming. And how do I then, as a therapist, guide them? Does that make sense?
That's telling you something right there. If it gets that overwhelming, it's because either the exile hasn't reduced its energy and it's too much for the client right now. And you can then guide the client to ask the exile to reduce its energy or move back a little bit, or maybe just reduce what it's showing to the client. But I would go a step further. If that's happening, is because you haven't cleared the path yet. When your client is self-led, the exile can show anything to your client and they're just holding space in a very compassionate state, in a very curious state. So if it's getting too overwhelming for the system, then that's because protectors. So check back, go back and check with the protectors.
Thank you.
Yep. It is important to check to see if a part is stuck in time. Exiles are always stuck in time. If they are, then you need to do a retrieval or a corrective experience or a do-over. It's the same, basically the same thing. Corrective experience and do-over is the same thing. A retrieval is literally you're retrieving that part or that exile from that experience, from whatever space is stuck in. So you should offer that if a part is stuck in time. Parts who have been neglected or not believed, or their stories have been denied, usually need to use the body more than any other parts to tell their stories. So to feel kind of like fully understood. So I've had clients who, when we're in this space doing a corrective experience or a retrieval, and they're in this witnessing space with our exile, and they sometimes need to stand up and use their bodies and just like feel what the exile is showing them. So invite your clients to, like, when you feel that, Can you feel what the exile is showing you right now? If the client is being fully self-led, they will take that. They will be able to handle that. If they're not, protectors will jump in. Different parts may need different things to feel witnessed. Just keep that in mind. Just ask, what does this part need for it to feel witness, for it to feel like we're seeing it? Or it needs, and this is another proximity question. Do you need to move to the right so the part can see you? Do you need to move closer to the part so the part can fully see you? So here you can use your proximity questions as well to bring that witnessing piece. Check with the client about feelings, tolerance, as visible emotions are being expressed. So when you're in that space, the exile is sharing all of this with your client. Check in. Can you handle that? Is that too much? Just check in with your client. Managers often interfere here. And like I said before, if the exile is just open the floodgates and is showing all of this right away, and you haven't done the work of clearing the path, and there's no contract from the protectors, managers will automatically interject and shut everything down. So check with your client. And again, you can contract with the exile. Is the exile willing to just show us a snippet rather than the full movie, than the full experience? Can it show us just a snippet of what happened? And again, check in. How does that feel to you? Is that doable? Can you handle a little bit more? Yes, I'm just here. I just want to see what happened to this little person. Often, if the client is being self-led, that's the answer you'll get. Ask if there's more. If the client is able to handle what the exile is showing, ask the client to ask the exile if there is more. Then ask the client to ask the exile if it feels fully seen and understood. This piece of witnessing is for that, so the exile can feel seen and understood by self. When the answer is yes, this is the green light to proceed to unburdening. If the answer is no, I don't feel understood, then you stay there with the exile, right? What else does it want you to know? What else does it want you to see? What else does it want you to feel? So you get that, yes, it feels understood, it feels seen, and that's when you proceed to the unburdening process. So in this step of witnessing, you have two steps. And like I said before, these are retrieval and a corrective experience. Retrieval can happen in the beginning as part of or at the end of witnessing, right? Sometimes exiles are ready to just be taken out of that space. I don't want to be in my grandma's living room anymore. I want you to take me somewhere else because a lot happened there. Ask the part if it is stuck in the past. When you're doing the retrieval, most of the time, exiles are always will be stuck in the past. And they just want to get out of there. If yes, ask if it would like to come into the present with the client. Does this part, after we have updated, right? The part now knows who the client is, how old the client is, the present life of the client. Now the part has all this information. Now the part gets to say, yes, I want to come with you because I don't like it here. Sometimes parts will like to stay there, but they often want to stay in a different space. And then that's when you have to do more work around what's keeping the part there. What are the fears and concerns? And often there's a part interjecting that is fearful about the retrieval process. So keep that in mind. If the exile is not willing to come to the present, there's something else there, usually a manager that's fearful about bringing the part to the present. A corrective experience is when the client's self or the practitioner's self enters the space, the scene, what's happening. So the client self is there. And if there's not enough self or critical mass of self, then you also can enter the scene with them, right? What does the exile need from us, from you right now? That doesn't usually happen because, again, in IFS, we work a lot with protectors. We work a lot clearing the path. So then you can just take a step back and allow the client to just do that work in that space as they're being self-led. But in that space, in that scene, the self shows with the part, the way the exile needed a loving, caring adult at that time. And have the client ask the part if it would like to come with them to the present moment. Like mentioned that before, that's a good opportunity to ask the part. Does it want to be retrieved? Does it want to come to the present? If no, if a part says no, I don't want to come to the present, ask what needs to happen first. Sometimes parts need to do, exiles need to take care of something or do something. I just want to tell my grandma how much she hurt me. I just want to tell my parents how much they hurt me when I was 5 years old, and allow the exile to do that. That's another process. That's called inviting those people's higher selves into that space. So then the exile can give that information to them and they're able to accept that. That's more technical. It's more in, I guess, one of my workshops or level 1 that we go into that more in depth. But that usually happens. Parts before they come to the present moment, they need to do something. Oh, I need to grab my blankie from my room. I had people, exiles, say that. Oh, I need to grab my favorite toy to bring it with me. Let's do that. Don't forget to check with protectors' fears and concerns while you're in that space. Does the system feels okay us doing that? Now you're expanding it to the full entire system. Does the system feel okay giving this corrective experience? And with the retrieval process? Yes, we have the green light. Everybody feels okay with that. Often the part's burden of responsibility needs to be addressed before it's willing to leave that time. Often the exile's burdens, the responsibilities need to be addressed. What were some of the responsibilities you had as a 5-year-old? And let the exile explain and tell the story around responsibilities and burdens. So you want to address burdens in this witnessing process because what comes next is unburdening. Okay. Before leaving that space, ask if other parts want or are ready to come along. That's a good opportunity to look around what other parts need to come along with the exile that are stuck in time. Often you might get 1 or 2 parts, or maybe none, that would like to come to the present as well. But that's just optional. If there are no parts present that want to come along, then that's totally okay. But I think that's a good question to ask while you're doing the witnessing. So the end here is self takes the part to the place of choice. You have the client work with the part, what kind of options, where does it want to go? A safe and comfortable space. Is it to the house where the client lives today? Is it to a park? Is it to the beach? Is it to where? Where does the part want to go? A safe location. Questions about retrieval corrective experience or the witnessing as a step. All right, so now the part has shared the experiences, the pain. You had the client ask all these questions to the exile, to the part. You perhaps have entered that space with your client's self to facilitate the process. Now we get to the unburdening, right? That's why it's so important to address burdens in the witnessing step or in the witnessing space, because now we understand the burdens that this part carries. So now unburdening, self-ask the part if it is ready to unload the emotions, the memories, the sensations, the beliefs about themselves that were taken by the experience that they experienced. If the part feels safe and fully witnessed, the part usually says, yes, I am ready to unload all of this. This is too much. If no, ask what else needs to happen, or how else does it want to be witnessed, and what is it afraid it'll happen if it unloads all of these burdens. Sometimes exiles are afraid to let go of the burdens because the stories and the messages have been so embedded and saturated that they truly believe that they needed to be parentified, that they needed to do this for their siblings, for mom and dad. Those are heavy burdens that they couldn't say much when they experienced that sexual assault or whatever trauma that was, right? So if the part says no and is reluctant to unload, stay there. Address fears and concerns. What do you think it would happen if you let go of these responsibilities and stay in that space until the part says, yes, I'm ready? Until the part feels fully seen and understood, do not proceed. Just stay in that space with the part. If the part says yes, ask the part to take the burden out of its body and give it to the elements, whether it is the earth, light, fire, water, wind, or whatever other element, a black hole, whatever the part wants to give these burdens to. Okay. A fire pit, let's light up a fire pit. Yes, let's do it. Right, let's throw it all in there. Great. And you have your client witnessing this, okay? In facilitating with the part. Check if the part has unloaded all the burdens at the end. If all the burdens haven't been unloaded, then ask why. What is it holding it back? Why does it want to keep these set of burdens? Then stay there. I believe in partial unburdenings. I honestly, when I'm doing an unburdening with a client, sometimes an exile is not ready to fully unburden all of it, and that's okay. If it's just 60% of my burdens that I'm going to give to this fire pit or throwing into this black hole, that's okay. We try to go for a full unburdening, but if the part is just willing to give a piece, that is okay. After the part has given the burdens, just ask the question, has this burden disappeared or transformed? Is it totally gone? In my experience, when exiles want to keep a burden, is because it means something else to them. And that's when I would give them the option to transform that little 5% of the burden that they want to keep before we come to the present. So work with your client, work with the exile, work in this space, use your creativity in guiding the client. Once the part has given the burdens, ask, how is the part doing? How does it feel to unload all of these burdens or partially unload these burdens? And again, just remember, a full unburdening doesn't need to happen all the time. Always explore how much the part is willing to unload. And you can do this by asking, how much % of this burden would you like to unload at this moment? I've had exiles just wanting to unload 40% of their burdens. And then 6 months down the road, they come back with, I'm ready to unload 10% more. And then a year after, they're ready to maybe unload 20% more. So just work with what works for the part in that moment. Is it 60? Is it 40? Is it 10? Is it 100? Just give those options. Use your imagination and creativity in that space. You don't expect your clients to come up with all of this. The second piece is invitation. So after the unburdening has happened, now we invite the qualities that the part would like to now invite in. What may be needed in the future for this part and what got pushed out by the burden. The space can be filled with positive qualities make sure the response comes from the exile part you have been working with. So invite these positive qualities. What now that you have given this parentification burden, you've unloaded that, what would you like to invite in? I just want to be free. I just don't want to take care of my siblings like I used to. That makes sense. Invite that in. Before I move to the last two steps, questions about unburdening and invitation.
Quick question about the checking this response is coming directly from the exile part. How do you know?
Well, the exile will tell you you're still in that space. You're in that space with the exile. We've been in that space through the healing steps. It's client self and exile part. So the client is speaking directly to the exile, and the exile is sharing all this information. It's different if you have nonverbal parts or exiles. And that's when the client and you have to do some direct access more to take care of this baby, do the retrieval of this baby. And then the client gets to say, these are the burdens that the baby carries. It's just like a parent. Are you willing to put those burdens aside or put them in the fire pit or the black hole for the baby? And then you guide the client's same process.
So thank you for that. I'm just making sure, just because it says check this response is coming. I don't know why I'm hung up on this, but like I understand with the nonverbal part, exile part, but like, is there a possibility that protector, it's coming from I don't know.
Well,
Like, why is it check this response?
Yeah, so the response, again, this is why it's so important to clear the path, because once you get to the exile, what are the characteristics of an exile, right? Young, overwhelmed, and there's a full list of how exiles present. So you might want to look into that, so to differentiate how do exiles show. I think that's your question, right? How do you know it's coming from the exile? That's what I heard.
Guess so, or I don't know. Check this response, or if there's a common thing where it might be a self. I don't know. I'm all
once you're in that space,
discombobulated.
you're with the exile, so there's no other. That's a really good question. I love that you're thinking about this other options that what if it's apart? Then you will know an agenda. Exiles present differently than protectors.
Cool. Thanks, Dr. Star.
Yep. Any other questions before we move on to the last three steps?
I think, I think you just said that the way as the therapist, we might be able to tell is the agenda of the part.
Yep.
So if a client says, oh, this is an exile, but it seems like the agenda is more the agenda of a protector, then we can ask questions without telling the client, but to clarify. Is that correct?
Yes. You would then focus on that. Let's explore that. Where is that coming from? Ask questions to that part. Yes, Maggie.
For some reason, this might be like feeling of where I'm at today, but for some reason, I'm really struggling with these steps, not in lines of understanding. I don't know, there's something coming up for me about unburdening and doing more harm. There's like a deep skepticism coming up in me. Where I am in my IFS practice, it's mostly been direct access. Just that's where I'm sort of coming in and getting used to it. And something about this unburdening and healing, I'm like relating it to, I don't know exactly how to words to this, but as someone who's really interested in IFS, if I am coming up against my own deep skepticism of a certain part, not a certain part, but a certain process in certain steps, what do I do about that?
Yes, and we're going to talk about it. Therapist parts. And I just want to validate that here in our space. There is a part, skeptic part. I don't want to label it for you, but that's what I heard.
Very much.
So let's just recognize that. Let's just validate that. That's present. And that is welcome here. The healing steps are one of the most parts activated process in IFS, especially for beginner practitioners, because you're not the only person who said this to me in workshops, IFS trainings, and all that. So let's just validate that. Let's acknowledge it. And it's the amount of work working with an exile. It is a lot for the practitioner. And we'll go over those parts when we discuss practitioners' parts and how to do the work with yourself as you are doing these healing steps with your client. Thank you for speaking for that. Yeah. All right. Anybody else would like to speak for anything else? So these are the last steps. Integration. So after we've done through the onboarding process, now we bring the exile to integrate with the system. So we invite the protectors to see the exile part now in its current state, not burden, unburden exile. So remember those protectors who were just waiting by the sidelines? We invite them in now to witness and to help this exile reintegrate into the system. You want to check for protectors' thoughts and reactions now that the exile is unburdened. And if they will also like to unburden, that's a really good opportunity there in this step of integration, because some protectors do carry burdens too. So you want to ask them if they want to, after witnessing, after seeing, wow, this younger part of us has unloaded all its burdens, and look, it's in a current unburdened state. Can we also do the same? Yes. And then they would often release their burdens too. A good example is a perfectionist part, protector, that perhaps was protecting the exile. You invite that in, and then the perfectionist now sees the exile as its unburdened state. So now that perfectionistic part is like, well, I don't really have to protect this young person anymore. I would like to release my burdens too, in my role of being a perfectionist and having to do everything perfect all the time. So invite that in. If they want to give their burdens up. If not, then you can continue with the integration process. If yes, guide them through the unburdening process. So we'll go back. If a protector says, yes, I want to release my burdens too, then you go back to this process, unburdening. You do the same that you did with the exile. And you ask the protector, what would they like to do now instead of what they've been doing? Can they take on a new preferred role in the system? What does the whatever protector that unburdened want to do now? Do they want to take a new role? Where would they like to stay? Do they want to come to the present as well? With who? With the exile, the unburdened exile, with you as the adult or in your current developmental stage? Do they want to come to the present with you? Or do they want to go somewhere else? Do they need a vacation? What else would they like to do? Intentions. Ask the part what it would like from the client as they move forward. And you tell the client, can you ask the part what it would like from you as you move forward now that it has been unburdened and it doesn't have to do the job that it was doing or that it has been doing for you. I often prescribe this to my clients to check in with their unburdened parts regularly for at least 3 weeks to anchor the change that has happened in the system. So getting to that routine, checking in with the unburdened parts. Are they still feeling okay? Are they still in their preferred role, in their preferred state or location? Ask the client if they can make a commitment to the part to follow through with the request. If yes, how will the client make this happen? This is part of setting intentions. Get a concrete action plan. If no, can the client make a commitment to work with the protectors that are blocking the ability to follow through? Usually you'll have protectors that are blocking, checking in with the unburdened parts. So again, You'll have to move to those protectors, checking for fears and concerns until you proceed. Last step is appreciation. Thank all the parts and those that have been unburdened that now are integrated in the spider web in a more harmonious, more balanced way. That's the last step.